Good morning. Mark Cooper holds a bachelor's degree from Indiana University and earned his JD from the University of Georgia. He practiced law in Orlando from 1972 until his retirement in 2015. Mark is also the former chair of the Florida Bar Grievance Committee for the Ninth Judicial Circuit, which investigates and prosecutes ethical violations committed by lawyers. Additionally, at the University of Central Florida, Mark has taught courses in contract law and legal ethics. For many years, we have been privileged to have Mark as a guest speaker to our history group. He has presented on topics such as Thurgood Marshall, the unsung heroes of the civil rights movement, Leopold and Loeb, heroines of the civil rights movement, the Scottsboro Boys, eugenics in America, and last year he spoke on Rosewood, the destruction of a Florida community. Today's presentation is titled Medgar Evers, the Most Hated Man in Mississippi. So on behalf of the history group, it's my great pleasure to introduce our fellow club member, Mark Cooper. Mark?
Good morning. The story of Medgar Evers is told in two different chapters. The first chapter deals with the life of the man who was once known as the most hated man in America. The second chapter tells of the actions taken by others after his death in order to obtain justice for the circumstances surrounding his assassination. Taken together, the impact of the life and death of this very quiet man on our nation in general and the civil rights struggle in particular cannot be overstated. Medgar Evers was born on July 2nd, 1925, in Decatur, Mississippi. He was the third of 5 children of Jesse and James Evers. His older brother, Charles, who was known to Medgar as Charlie, plays an unusual part in this story, and there'll be more about him a little bit later. The family owned a small farm, and Medgar's father also worked at a sawmill in order to make ends meet. Medgar graduated from a segregated high school which was located 12 miles from his home. The Evers children walked to and from school because buses were not made available to black children. Medgar was a teenager when the whites in Decatur took care of Willie Tingle. The facts are a little bit unclear, but Tingle was somehow involved with a white woman. Tingle was grabbed off the street by a white mob, was stripped of his clothes, tied to a tree, and shot. The clothes were left on the ground to rot. Medgar often visited this site, and he asked his father why Tingle had to die. Because he was colored, was all that his father would say. And Medgar never forgot. Another story became part of the Evers legend. One Saturday, when Medgar and Charlie were young, they accompanied their father to town where the elder Evers was to pay his bill at the white-owned sawmill commissary. Before a group of white men gathered at the store, the owner of the store demanded that Mr. Evers pay more money than he knew was due. So Mr. Evers said, and this is a quote, I don't owe that much, and I won't pay it. The white man pulled a gun from behind the counter, but Evers quickly broke a bottle over the counter and said, and this is a quote also, "If you make another move, I'll bust your brains out." The Evers boys, Charlie and Medgar, were terrified, and they ran from the store to avoid a beating or worse. Their father said, "Don't ever let anyone beat you." And the boys took the words to heart. Charlie vowed to always get in the first lick, but Medgar vowed to be a peacemaker. The brothers, while always very, very close, were also very, very different. Charlie became a bootlegger and went on to run a large criminal enterprise. Medgar, of course, chose a different path. Medgar and Charlie served in the Army during World War II. And Medgar participated in the Normandy landings. He was later honorably discharged as a sergeant. And after the war, Medgar attended what is now known as Alcorn State University. He was a natural athlete. He was a star halfback on the football team, and he ran track. He was also on the debate team, sang in the school choir, and was elected junior class president. He was the editor of the campus newspaper, and he was editor of the 1951 yearbook. He was listed in Who's Who in American Colleges and Universities. While at Alcorn, he married Merle Beasley, a gifted pianist who majored in education because the state decided that black students didn't need to be able to major in music. Medgar received a bachelor's degree in business administration in 1952. Medgar and Merle moved to Mound Bayou, Mississippi. The only city in the state of Mississippi founded, settled, and still governed by black people. Medgar worked as an insurance salesman for the Magnolia Mutual Life Insurance Company, which was a black-owned company. When trying to sell insurance, Medgar went to see his customers, and he was shocked at the squalid conditions of the black people living and working on the old plantations, where he saw families of 10 or more living in shacks barely big enough to be chicken coops. Medgar quickly became involved in the civil rights movement. He founded the Regional Council of Negro Leadership, which was a local lobbyist group, where he organized boycotts of service stations with bumper stickers on cars saying, "Don't buy gas where you can't use the restroom." He joined the local chapter of the NAACP. But as Medgar's anger grew, he toyed with the idea of creating a black guerrilla group of night riders to counter the Ku Klux Klan, so as to give the white community a taste of terror. The group was to be called the Mississippi Mau Mau, which was in honor of the group which was then fighting in Kenya. And the planning went beyond fantasy planning. Charlie and Medgar acquired weapons, and because of their military service, they knew how to use them. But after a close reading of the Bible, Medgar had a change of heart, and he realized that a group such as this would simply lead to more violence, more misery, and was counter to everything he believed in. On January 11, 1954, which was months before the Supreme Court published the case of Brown versus Board of Education, Medgar applied for admission to the University of Mississippi Law School. Thurgood Marshall agreed to serve as his attorney in the expected litigation. Medgar planned to practice law and eventually run for Congress. The Mississippi Board of Higher Learning, which was the entity that handled admissions to the colleges in the state, was outraged. And the state attorney general, J.P. Coleman, called Medgar to his office for a personal interview. Coleman questioned where Medgar would stay while attending the segregated school, which was, after all, a political powerhouse in the state of Mississippi. And Medgar replied, and this is a quote, "On campus, sir, I am very hygienic. I bathe every day, and I assure you that this brown won't rub off." Surprise, surprise, his application was rejected. And for the white community of the state, Medgar Evers became known as the most hated man in Mississippi. Shortly after the Brown decision was announced, on May the 17th, 1954, a Yale-educated Mississippi judge named Thomas P. Brady delivered what came to be known as the Black Monday speech. In true Mississippi fashion, he blasted the Brown decision as atheistic, socialist, communist propaganda which would lead to the destruction of life as it was known in the South and ultimately lead to the mongrelization of society. Africans, he said, should have been glad of the opportunity to become slaves. They were, after all, his words, simply well-broken horses, beasts of burden. Sitting in the audience was Byron Della Beckwith, friends called Delay. He was transfixed by the speech. The troika of communism, atheism, and integration became linked in his mind as the root of all evil. More about him a little later. Several weeks after the speech, another Mississippian named Robert Patterson Robert Patterson created an organization called the Citizens Council, which was later to be known as the White Citizens Council. Within 4 years, the group would have 80,000 paid members in the state of Mississippi and 300,000 members throughout the South. More about them later as well. 2 years later, in 1956, the state of Mississippi created an organization called the Sovereignty Commission to battle integration. The commission was charged with the duty, and this is a long quote from the public records of the state of Mississippi, the duty to do and perform any and all acts and things deemed necessary and proper to protect the sovereignty of the state of Mississippi from encroachment thereon by the federal government or any branch, department, or agency thereof, and to resist the usurpation of this rights and powers reserved to the state. More about them later as well. The The NAACP was impressed with Medgar. And in December 1954, Medgar was appointed the first field secretary of the NAACP in the state of Mississippi. His family moved to Jackson. He put 40,000 miles a year on his car as he traveled the entire state trying to do a number of things: form new chapters, register voters, monitor compliance with the Brown decision, and gather affidavits to support further school desegregation suits. This job could easily have been called a suicide mission. This role in the NAACP was a lifelong internal conflict for Medgar. The stated goal of the association was to work with the legal system to create change through litigation and legislation only. The program was led by future Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. The organization never advocated violence or civil disobedience. Medgar thought that the organization was a worthy one, and he continued to work for it and with it, despite his personal feelings that confrontational action was more effective than litigation. As a result of his discomfort with the organization, throughout the rest of his life, his relationship with the NAACP was strained at best. There are literally hundreds of examples of violence and acts of retribution put upon those with whom Medgar met, seeking voter registration and resistance organization. People lost employment. They lost credit from local merchants. They were evicted from their homes. Churches and other meeting places were bombed or burned, and lynchings became the order of the day. Threats of violence followed Medgar wherever he went. He purchased an Oldsmobile 88 with a V8 engine so that he could outrun his pursuers. His name began appearing on Ku Klux Klan death lists throughout the state. Telephone death threats were constant. I'll give you an example that I only learned of yesterday. I'm reading a book called The Barn, which deals with the aftermath of the Emmett Till death. I learned a lot of things in the book that I didn't know, but one of them was there was a witness to the killing of Emmett Till, a young black man named Willie Reed. When criminal charges were brought against the men who, in fact, killed Emmett Till, Willie Reed agreed to testify. A brave act. He did testify, and then immediately following his testimony, he met with Medgar Evers, who secretly drove him from South Mississippi, the Delta region, all the way to Memphis, where he could get on a plane and fly to Chicago. That act of Willie Reed and of Medgar Evers was heroic. In 1963, Jackson's mayor said in a public statement that the NAACP was a northern outside group. With the aid of President Kennedy and with the Federal Communications Commission's approval, Medgar went on television and said that more than half of the members of the association were in fact Southerners. He told the television audience that whether or not Mississippi chose to change, history had reached a turning point. After increased death threats, Medgar told CBS News, "They said they're going to blow my house up." In a later interview with the New York Times, he said, quote, "If I die, it will be for a good cause. I'm fighting for America just as much as the soldiers in Vietnam." Many of us remember that on June 12, 1963, in a major address, President Kennedy told a national television audience that the grandchildren of slaves were still not free. Shortly after midnight, on the night of the presidential address, Medgar Evers pulled his car into the driveway of his Jackson, Mississippi home, and that's a picture of his home right there. You'll note the plaque there commemorating. Medgar unloaded a bundle of T-shirts from his car, which were imprinted, "Jim Crow must go." And as he closed the car door, he was hit in the back by a soft-nosed bullet fired from an Eddystone Enfield 1917 rifle. The bullet entered him above his right kidney and mushroomed, breaking 2 ribs and puncturing a lung. He collapsed on the driveway, and the bullet exited his body and shattered a living room window. Murley refused to allow the blood, which was then all over the driveway, to be removed. She wanted people to see, sort of the way Jacqueline Kennedy was after the assassination of her husband. Over the years, the blood has washed away from natural causes. Medgar was able to crawl about 30 feet, where his wife Murley and his children rushed to him. He was then rushed to a local Jackson hospital, which initially refused to treat him because of his race. When informed of his identity, the hospital did treat him, and he was the very first black person ever to be treated by an all-white hospital in the state of Mississippi. 2 weeks shy of his 38th birthday, Medgar Evers was buried at Arlington National Cemetery on June 19th with full military honors. Nearly 5,000 people attended Medgar's funeral, including Martin Luther King Jr., Roy Wilkins, and Ralph Abernathy. Chapter 2. Byron Della Beckwith was born in Sacramento, California on December 9, 1920. His father died when he was 3, and his mother resettled from Sacramento to Greenwood, Mississippi. His mother died when Byron was 12, and he was raised by 2 maternal uncles who were eccentric at best and probably mentally ill. Beckwith's maternal grandfather had served in the Confederate Army with General Nathan Bedford Forrest, who you may recall was the founder of the Ku Klux Klan. And although Byron's extended family was wealthy and well regarded in Greenwood, because Byron had been born in California, he was considered an outsider and eccentric, and the other kids never took to him. As a teenager, he was sent to a prestigious prep school in Tennessee. And in 1940, he enrolled at Mississippi State University, but his grades were so bad that he dropped out at the midterm. He returned to Greenwood and became a reasonably successful salesman, a profession that he kept from then on. By all accounts, from friends who have understandably declined to be named, Beckwith's only interests at this time were developing his sales skills, scotch and soda, and simply having a good time. He enlisted in the Marines in January 1942, just weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor, and he saw combat in the Pacific. He was severely wounded at Tarawa, and after rehabilitation, he was honorably discharged. He returned to Greenwood, where he endured a very difficult marriage. He began to drink too much and seemed to be bitter about just about everything. It's significant to note that at this point in time, his friends did not observe any particular grievance with blacks or Jews. But the Black Monday speech had an enormous impact on Beckwith. He immediately joined the Citizens Council, which was committed to the notion that opposition to integration was traitorous and that the NAACP was a communist front organization that threatened the Southern way of life. I couldn't find a lot in the way of documents about the White Citizens Council, and this flyer is not from the state of Mississippi. But if you look at this flyer, which I believe is from Alabama, I think it's from Selma. I may be wrong on that. Asks an important question. What have you done to personally maintain segregation? Beckwith never admitted to having joined the Klan, ever. But he didn't have any reason to. The government of Mississippi was staunchly segregationist, and the Citizens Council was widely known as the white-collar Klan. In 1956, Beckwith sent a letter asking to be hired by the Sovereignty Commission as an investigator, because while the commission said that it was a public relations body, it was, in fact, an investigative body. A little more on that later. Mississippi State Spy Agency received a letter from Beckwith, and he said in that letter, "To me, the fight for segregation is a life or death struggle, and nothing else is more important at this time. I will tear the mask from the NAACP and forever rid this fair land from the disease of integration." On June 21, 1963, Byron Della Beckwith was indicted for the murder of Medgar Evers. The case seemed to be compelling. Beckwith's relatively rare Eddystone Enfield 1917 rifle was found in the brush across from the Evers home, and Beckwith's fingerprints were found on it. Witnesses placed Beckwith's car near the scene, and two taxi drivers testified that Beckwith had asked them for directions to the Evers home. In addition, in an earlier letter that was sent to a local newspaper, Beckwith had written the following: "The NAACP, under the direction of its leadership, is doing a first-class job of getting itself a position to be exterminated." Beckwith claimed that he was 200 miles away at the time of the murder. In fact, the spy agency, the Sovereignty Commission, was actively working to help the defense, and they found two police officers to bolster the claimed alibi. The all-white jury was deadlocked, 7-5 in favor of not guilty. The prosecution tried again. And during the second trial, Mississippi Governor Ross Barnett entered the courtroom and shook hands with Beckwith in front of the jury. The second trial also deadlocked, with an even greater number of white jurors favoring not guilty. Time passed. While Beckwith was not convicted, neither was he acquitted. Because both trials resulted in hung juries, in Mississippi, double jeopardy did not attach, and the threat of further prosecution hung over him. Charlie Evers, who had given up his life of crime and became a legitimate and successful businessman, took up the fight for equality for his deceased brother, working tirelessly for the NAACP. Myrlie, his widow, moved to California, where she became the Public Works Commissioner for the city of Los Angeles, as well as a civil rights activist. She continuously advocated for another attempt to prosecute Beckwith. In 1989, a new name took up the fight for justice. Jerry Mitchell, a white reporter for the Jackson Clarion Ledger, became actively involved in solving unsolved murder cases from the civil rights era. On October 1, 1989, in an article, Mitchell wrote the following, quote, "Mississippians should view with loathing the revelation that the second trial of the murder case of slain civil rights worker Medgar Evers was tried on an uneven field. Hard to read, but that's the article. Mitchell had learned that the Sovereignty Commission had investigated all potential jurors and reported its findings to Beckwith's defense. One potential juror was stricken from the panel after the commission reported that he might be Jewish. Others were stricken because the commission felt that they were not sufficiently backwoods Baptist. Mitchell and his family began to receive threats, but he continued investigating the case and writing articles encouraging further prosecution of Beckwith. Mitchell didn't stop at writing articles. He met with the district attorney to present the case. The DA was concerned with possible legal issues and was concerned about going forward. The Constitution guaranteed defendants the right to a speedy trial, and Mississippi law required that defendants be tried within 270 days of their arraignment. Either argument could have derailed a further prosecution. Additionally, many of the original witnesses at the trial were now deceased. And while their sworn testimony at the earlier trials could be used without their being present, surprise, surprise, there was no transcript of the earlier trials in the records at the courthouse. So you couldn't prove what their testimony was. Also, the murder weapon had vanished. Even so, Mitchell met with the assistant district attorney assigned to the case. Bobby DeLauder. And Evers learned that the case was, in fact, being actively investigated. DeLauder was a soft-spoken Baptist deacon whose uncle had been a member of the legislature who sponsored the legislation creating the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. Even so, DeLauder was eager to get justice for Medgar Evers. Medgar even interviewed Byron Della Beckwith by telephone and later in person. Beckwith first asked Mitchell to swear that he was not a Jew. And he then expressed his views on race in general and Medgar Evers in particular. Every once in a while, I see Evers' picture in the paper. He is high yellow, a very light-skinned N-word. His brother is black as soot. There is no true bloodline. They're just mongrels. God hates mongrels. To adulterate is to mix blood. It is forbidden in Scripture and forbidden in society. Close quote. Beckwith denied killing Medgar. Mitchell continued his investigation. He found a copy of the trial transcript from the original two trials, and as a result, the earlier testimony of the now deceased witnesses could be used at a new trial. And Bobby DeLauder determined in his opinion that the law would not prevent a new prosecution, despite the concerns about the lapse of time. And further surprise, Mitchell was able to locate the murder weapon. Mitchell located records of the Sovereignty Commission showing that in 1958, the governor had ordered the commission to investigate the race agitator Medgar Evers in the hope of catching him in an illegal act. Finally, he discovered proof that the two officers who tried to support Beckwith's claim that he was 200 miles away at the time of the murder were, in fact, lying. In December 1990, Byron Della Beckwith was again indicted for the murder of Medgar Evers. While Beckwith would no longer talk to Mitchell, he did agree to meet with one of his colleagues, J. Lee Howard, who also worked at the Jackson Clarion Ledger. And he said to Howard, long quote, "More and more people are getting mad about race mixing and anti-Christian sentiment. And if more of these pockets of pus splatter all over me, they're likely to do something about it. If I sin against thee, ever-loving God, well, he's going to kick my ass. These other races, creeds, and colors, we're supposed to control them. That's why God put us down here." Close quote. As reporter Howard left Beckwith's home, deputies arrived and arrested Byron Della Beckwith. In September 1992, the Mississippi Supreme Court stopped the trial even before it began to rule on the constitutional question of the requirement for a speedy trial. But on December 17th, the court ruled that because of the newly discovered evidence, like the role of the Sovereignty Commission and the false testimony of the police officers, the case could proceed. The third trial of Byron Della Beckwith began on January 27, 1994, 30 years to the day from the beginning of the first trial. On February 5, 1994, the jury found Byron Della Beckwith guilty of premeditated murder of Medgar Evers, and he was sentenced to life in prison. While Beckwith was being led away in handcuffs, he kept muttering over and over again two words: Jerry Mitchell, Jerry Mitchell, Jerry Mitchell. On January 21, 2001, Byron Della Beckwith died in prison. Bobby DeLauder, the prosecutor who had tried the case against Beckwith, became a judge. But he was later accused of accepting a bribe. He was removed from the bench, disbarred, and sent to prison. Jerry Mitchell has won over 20 national awards for his journalism, including a MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant. His work has led to the murder convictions of over 22 people for civil rights era's killings. Medgar Evers is not the only hero we're talking about today. Jerry Mitchell is a hero. For those of you who may be interested in learning more about this topic, I recommend 3 books that were helpful to me in learning more about what I've discussed today. The first is The Ghosts of Mississippi by Marianne Ballers, which dealt exclusively with the Medgar Evers case and the aftermath. The second book, which is a must-read for anyone interested in the civil rights struggle, is Race Against Time by Jerry Mitchell. In that book, he dealt with a number of cases, including the Evers case. He dealt with the case of the killed civil rights workers in 1963, I think. And the third book is called The Spies of Mississippi by Rick Bowers. This book deals exclusively with the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. And if you really want to be repulsed, if you really want your stomach to turn, you have to read this book. It has been said that those who ignore history are deemed to repeat it. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. As always, wonderful. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Mark. That was really interesting. I didn't know anything about Medgar Evers. Well, I'd heard the name, but the facts were really enlightening, and you did a great job.
Thank you.
But I have a 2-part question. First of all, I noticed in the Sovereignty Commission letter that you had, that pamphlet that was to the people of Dallas, I believe, but was published in another place.
It was in Dallas County, which I think was in Alabama.
Oh, was it Alabama? Thank you. It mentioned...
And that was not from the Sovereignty Commission. That was from the white citizens.
The citizens' rights. Thank you for correcting me. I noticed the name of Governor Wallace on that letter. I was trying to read it as you were showing it. So I wanted to know from you, the first question is, what role did Wallace play in all of this? Of course, he later had a sort of an epiphany where he changed his views in later life away from his racist attitudes of the 50s and 60s. So did he have any role to play? The second question that I have is that after Beckwith was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, did the family of Medgar Evers sue Beckwith's estate or his family for any kind of compensation for what had happened to Medgar Evers? Thank you.
Okay, well, Wallace was the governor of Alabama, not Mississippi. And he had no direct impact in any of this that I've been able to discover, other than his public statements influenced the minds of people. The family did not sue Beckwith because by that time Beckwith didn't have any money. He had never acquired any significant wealth. After he got back from the Army, he had began drinking heavily. So he drank away a lot of what wealth he did have, but he was living on a subsistence life by the time he was ultimately arrested and convicted. So no, there was no point in suing.
Thank you for your talk. It's a very fitting subject for today, and I didn't realize that you do these annually. Recently, I was reading about Merle Evans, Medgar's wife. There have been many productions about the two of them. But in one audio tape interview of Merle, the witness story that you quoted, I believe it was that witness that he drove to Tennessee in a coffin. She cited that in an interview. I also wanted to just add that I read last year, I guess President Biden awarded Evers the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The last thing I wanted to say, and you devoted a good section of your talk, especially when you were quoting Beckwith's words about mongrels and his justification and his own background. I believe it's in Genesis. Over the centuries, in addition to the other movements that were playing into people's minds, the history of the Confederacy and eugenics, But throughout the centuries, the biblical justification for this racism against darker people or other groups, they cite as being Ham's curse. And unfortunately, you will still hear that. I've heard it from family in the Midwest. So, justifying I can't quote any longer the story, but one of Noah's sons, and saying that one of the sons was cursed and of darker skin. So that has been justified throughout the millennia, a misinterpretation of Genesis.
There are a lot of
Thank you.
Justifications floated, a lot of explanations floated. That's one of them, but there are many others as well.
Are there any other questions?